what happens when you combine a former admiral from the U.S. Navy with a Scotland Yard detective? You get the world's most interesting and charismatic corporate security consulting company. From China to AI, Roderick Jones and Mike LeFever and I have an amazing discussion about the various risks facing businesses worldwide. Stick around, you're going to love this episode. Boundary Breakers is brought to you by Carter and Clark. So what I'd love to do is, if just for the audience's sake, just give a quick intro, just kind of your origin story, where you came from, how you got here, and then, just a brief explanation of your career, your military history, however you want to present that. And then I want to talk about Concentric, what got you guys together, what it is that you guys deliver value-wise that's different than what's out there, some crisis planning, some crisis management, and just let you guys take us to school on your areas of expertise. So, Mike, do you want to start just with a quick background?
Let's start with Roderick. Yeah, Roderick's the executive chairman. So.
All right.
You got it. Roderick, you're up.
Well, yeah, I'm from Birmingham originally in England, and so I started life there. Went to university, studied medieval history, and then joined the police in London, and became a detective, and then joined the intelligence services. Did a lot of counterterrorism and also protection of people. So bodyguard type protection team stuff. Did that, and then moved to America in 2003, and for the last 20 years have been working in private security, which shocks me to say that, actually. So I really enjoy the entrepreneurial process and how to think about companies and creating wealth. I enjoy that quite a lot, and I think we're in a particularly interesting time in the world for that right now. So, so that's me in a nutshell.
I love it. I couldn't agree more, though, by the way. We're at an interesting time in the world for that type of stuff. So very timely stuff, very timely. Mike?
All righty. Yeah, I grew up on the East Coast, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, went to the Naval Academy. Upon graduation and commissioning, I became a surface warfare officer. And so basically a ship driver by trade, cruisers, destroyers, hydrofoils. I had the good fortune to have command at every level, ships, squadron, strike groups. And then part of the book was that I was sent into Pakistan to lead the U.S. military relief effort in the horrific 2005 earthquake in Pakistan, 7.6, 80,000 dead, 178,000 injured, 3.5 billion people homeless in winter. I left there, went back and took some jobs in the Pentagon, and then was sent back as the senior defense official in Pakistan from 2008 all the way through 2011 through the Bin Laden raid. And then after that, they said, okay, you should probably come out now. And then I became the director for strategic operational planning at our National Counterterrorism Center. Retired, did some other work, did some work back with the U.S. government in training the new Joint Task Force commanders, new generals, and new senior enlisted at Capstone classes, as well as did some JTF training as well. Worked at McChrystal Group, worked at a cybersecurity company as chief operating officer, then was able to join Concentric about 4 years ago, which has been awesome.
I love it. So how did you guys link up?
Good story, actually. We, and I sort of talking about crisis. I mean, I think when you're running a company, you're sort of generally always at crisis, but there's sort of different periods. But I've come to probably the end of one of our business cycles. CEO was unexpectedly leaving, and there was sort of quite a few problems in the company at the time, and adapted particularly well over that period. And so I was looking for a CEO, and the president of our company was at a talk that Mike was giving in the Pacific Northwest. And Mike at the end of it offhandedly said, "Hey, if anyone's got a job, my wife and I really love the Pacific Northwest." And so we stalked him back to Virginia and made him an offer he could refuse, but he didn't. And and here he is now. So it was great. But I would say I often think about that initial meeting, because I think one of the things I love about Mike is just his, I've said this to him before, is ability to reinvent and rethink and not really have a dogma. And it's so critical when you're running things and providing leadership. You have to constantly be open to new ideas and be able to adapt those. You can't be, kind of a fanboy for new ideas. You don't want the latest thing driving you all the time, but just the openness to reinvention and dynamism, I think, is one of Mike's exceptional qualities.
I love that. Mike, do you agree, or you sound like you're talking about somebody else?
Humbled by the comments. It's you have gained a lot of experience through time and tribulation, but just the working relationship and that camaraderie and the bouncing back and forth has been so meaningful. In certain companies and certain organizations, you don't get that, but this has been incredibly magnificent from the standpoint of the sharing ideas, the bouncing ideas, the transparency, the back and forth to play to our strengths. We all have strengths. Roderick's amazing business acumen, and I think I had some stuff from leadership from my 38 years of service, retiring as a vice admiral. So that blend has and the teamwork has been exceptional.
I love it. Well, you guys are clearly successful. So tell us a little bit about Concentric, and what exactly does a security firm, or what exactly does Concentric offer in terms of services? Who's your target client? Who's your addressable market? Help us for the folks that may not know much about it. Kind of help us understand.
Happy to explain that. And it's very dynamic. So part of our problem is it changes a lot, but I think that reflects the market. So I think when most people think of a security company, they probably think about guards and guns, and we're not that. Typically the company started by working with some billionaires up here in the Pacific Northwest, and sort of that was our DNA, really. Like how do you build state-like security services for billionaires, because they're operating in a sort of semi-presidential capacity. They're going around the world, they're doing these things, they're kind of using philanthropy, using their companies, they're kind of operating like a mini state, and they need state-like functions to do that. So that was the genesis, really. How do you miniaturize things that you've seen in the national security community and then develop them and deploy them into a very unique space? Over time, we moved away from that. And we obviously have a deep DNA in kind of this sort of billionaire security world, but it's very niche. And, if you want to build a company, you have to move away from niches. So we work predominantly or more so with corporations as well now. And so again, it's very similar. Large corporations operate on a global scale. And so how do you manage their risk for them? Is that a question of security for their key personnel and key human assets? That tends to be one of our expertise. Is it how do they understand their threats? I think we sort of excel at the piece when there is a threat, and then we come in and do investigations, understand the clarity of that threat, or try and resolve it, and then deploy security and remediation essentially around that threat. So that can be as simple as man with gun stands next to person, but it's oftentimes a lot of procedural things, like how do you enhance your background screening? Do you have an insider threat program? How is your cybersecurity positioned? Now that you have this threat, how do you actually remediate it? So, that's essentially in a nutshell what we do. Once there is a threat, or we've identified a threat, we'll provide the remediation in a global context. So obviously, some things are simple. If you're traveling to Pakistan, you probably need security and diplomatic support. But if you're sitting in, Palo Alto, you probably don't need that, but you might need something else, So it's like, it's a little kind of measuring all that stuff. So that's in a nutshell what Concentric does. I think the security market is, there's some big players in it, some small players, and we're somewhere in between.
Okay, gotcha. And that makes a lot of sense in terms of you saying how dynamic it is, right?
Yeah.
I'm certain that when you got started, the physical threats or the maybe the threats that businesses had to keep front of mind or face probably looked a lot different than they do, particularly after 9/11, and then given the rise of all the technology. I don't want to try to pretend like I know what I'm talking about, because I don't, but I just imagine that your job, you guys' job in terms of imagining all these different potential threats changes fairly quickly. Would that be
yes and no?
fair?
I'd say 100% that, we're very, one of the things that's happened significantly since Mike joined the company, and we, hire a lot of veterans and people out in the national security community, because they do understand these deep trends, patterns, and have seen very, very serious threats. Threats against corporations, people tend not to be as serious. So if you practiced on the hardest game there is, then you can probably play the other one, I think. But I'd say, for all of the sophistication of attacks, ransomware, cyber attacks, I'm going to shut down your, kind of automatic car when you're in it. I'm going to tamper with your brakes electronically, all those kind of like sci-fi kind of versions, bullets are still 30 cents, and that does the job just as well if you want to get rid of someone. So, and that kind of hasn't changed my entire life, and I don't think it will even more. And I'm sure we'll touch on AI as we have this conversation. But given how hard robotics is, I can't see a robot bodyguard emerging anytime soon. So given that the easiest, physical threats tend to be the easiest to do, and you can see that in the counterterrorism space, instead of large sophisticated plots, it's like stabbings now, so it's like you get the most thing for the most physical impact. I think that still is a core part of our business, and I can't see that changing, honestly.
Yeah. Look, and fair enough. And I was speaking more to the fact of, when we first, with the GWAT, right? We got the guys out there waiting on these weapons of mass destruction and chemical warfare, and it driving through with unarmed vehicles, right? And so it turned out to be roadside bombs, IEDs, and things that, as the evil guys get a little bit more clever, they find different ways to do violence. Not that, but look, to your point, violence. I guess it depends on what window you're looking for, right? They're trying to do harm. How they try to do harm sometimes might be not be as relevant, but that's really fascinating. So do all of your clients? Do you have some cybersecurity clients, or is it all clients that face a physical threat or some type of threat? Maybe monetarily, and might use cyber to execute it.
I'd say everyone has a cyber threat. We do some work around privacy remediation in that space, just given that we just think the more information there is available to bad guys, the more they can craft attacks against you. So that's where we sit in it. We don't do like technical cybersecurity. We're not monitoring a cyber SOC or any of that stuff right now. We've done those businesses in the past, but it's not core part of our expertise right now, but we're very aware of it. We have the experts on our staff. We just don't deploy it often, because very large cybersecurity companies are very good at cybersecurity, so we tend to recommend that to clients.
Got it. So you don't have a team of like developers trying to hack into your client's website? No. But there are the companies out there that do that. So how give us a little bit more sort of background in terms of how you, Roderick, got into this, and how this sort of became your passion to keep businesses from crisis or from threats, I should say.
I think I would say the thing that turned me on in terms of passion was like, okay, how do you miniaturize national security kind of functions, and how do you then explain that to customers that they actually need that kind of thing? It's not as simple as like here's a guard somewhere. It's like, okay, well, you might need diplomatic support. You might need to be able to link in with US government assets. You might, there's like this whole sophisticated thing. So that's what really got me into it. And then, I think I actually just remember coming to America. I mean, I'd worked in the government most of my life, or being an academic, so I hadn't really thought about business, but I just got really fascinated by business, and I think that comes through. Like when you go and I mean, I really appreciate this when somebody, and Mike and I appreciate this when somebody learns our business before coming to try and sell us something. Obviously, we consumers as well. We have vendors, we have banking relationships, all kinds of things. So when someone that goes to the trouble to learn our business and understand what our pain points are, we love that. So I think that natural curiosity about business really drives you being able to set up a security business, because you're like, okay, I'm really curious about what are the major risks to a large coffee company? I don't know, but I'm like really curious. I would imagine supply chain, beans, are they worried about all their stores all around the world, or is it supply chain? It's just, you start to think about it. And I think that interest and passion comes through when pitching your first set of clients, and hopefully that carries through.
Yeah, no, for sure it does. Well, so it's funny that you say that, because my very next question is, this may come across as silly or ignorant, but what are the I mean, other than the obvious, right? Like maybe the CEO getting kidnapped for ransom. What are the big threats that a publicly traded multinational corporation faces? And I ask that more in terms of like ones that you guys experience, right? Not that possibly could happen, but help us ordinary people understand what these companies are facing.
Do you want to go, Mike, or do you want me to go?
Yeah, probably one of the things that I think Roderick hit on it is, some of our background, an incredible mosaic of people and experiences and background from all walks of life, from government, from CIA to military to FBI to Secret Service to Joint Special Operations to intelligence community, law enforcement. And it's that type of folks that have a great understanding. And I think one of the things we have that's a strength for us, for some of our clients, is being able to translate some of the geopolitical and geostrategic events that are happening and what could be the potential second and third order effects to their company, to their businesses, to their travel, or to their expectations. And so I think, as Roderick mentioned earlier, is that global perspective and that national security perspective that takes some of these issues and presents them to that might not consider those spin outs because of the involvement of what's going on in the Middle East or in Ukraine or in China, Taiwan, COVID or whatever. And so that idea of managing risks, but also looking at it from the, we do the privacy side that prevents them. There's so much digital dust out there so that people can use that to dox them and box them. And then the idea of being able to prepare them properly for travel and support them. We tend to do a lower side, but if they, want armed support or whatever, but the idea of having the intelligence to know what they're walking into so that they're prepared, as well as we don't want to put them in a predicament that requires, intense security,
right.
Or, an involvement because of the environment we suck them in because of our intelligence background and sensing the environment.
Yeah,
I love it. That's fascinating.
I think the threats I would think about for, and I think it's changed a lot actually, and it's going to continue to change. So 15 years ago, we would just, protect like the CEO, right? So the principal person. So, okay, the activities around that. But what happened 2016 onwards was a lot of companies then started to think about, and actually this was internally driven. They wanted not just the CEO protected, but the entire C-suite, and actually also key human assets within the company, right? And I think that is actually going to accelerate. If you think about AI, there's a small global group of people that can drive the next innovation there with knowledge, but also with market and how to do this, how to put all these things together. And I think so the concentration of human talent asset in companies is going to drive some of the threat thinking, because certainly as a bad actor, I'm going to think about that. So what we typically look at, or we're called in to deal with or mitigate, is number one, stalkers, 100%. Like, so you have any level of wealth or notoriety, within 20 seconds, you're going to get somebody sending you an email threatening you. Don't ask me why. It's just the world we live in. And so there's a whole process you have to think about how to deal with that: assessment, mitigation, and law enforcement liaison, and legal knowledge. So but that's usually a threat that happens immediately. I think detention risk is going to become back into an issue. It was around sort of 10, 15 years ago, but as you see borders closing around the world and, nationalist governments coming into power, you're a tech company or an oil company or you're an AI company and you're traveling to a country that might be non-aligned. So like India, I don't know, maybe detention risks a thing now. A warrant gets issued somewhere. We've dealt with that for hedge funds and big funds over the years, where they've had someone, just be in a part of the world where a US adversary was able to reach out and detain them. So that, and I think legal risk like that is a big issue. Ransomware aimed against individuals, I mean, that's an obvious one, where holding your personal data will spin that round. I think ID theft, the same thing. ID theft is devastating, happens a lot. Residential attacks, burglaries, high-end burglaries, very, very big in the Bay Area. Sophisticated organized crime gangs coming over the border from the south, coming up for a few days and doing hyper-violent, hyper-planned attacks against wealthy or prominent people. Seeing a lot of that. Children being threatened, big deal. Schools are pretty bad at protecting the information of their kids, particularly in prestigious schools. They'll post the schedules of the kids' sports team on the website, not understanding that's a perfect opportunity to create threat or problems there. Privacy breach, I think, is enormous. And that can come, and then that leads into fraud, essentially. So if your data's out there or breached in some way, someone can use that to target you for fraud or for all kinds of different messaging. So we see some of that. And then I think the last thing I would say, which nobody's geared to manage, and it is really hard, and this stuff is going to explode, but directed and personalized disinformation attacks against people. And the sophistication of those things now could be quite extreme. So you could create masses of data and just place a small piece of incrimination data in that data set, and then release it WikiLeaks style to an investigative journalist and destroy the reputation of a CEO, placing them in and or around some kind of international sex scandal or some kind of international fraud. And journalists have got to move copy, so what could start as like a sort of story in the, a blog somewhere, these are tried and true tactics. But I think with the advent of AI and the ability to craft these attacks in a more sophisticated way, I think disinformation attacks aimed at individuals to take them out of companies or to take them out of political positions, I think is going to be really challenging and we're thinking about that in our company. How do you know that's happening, number one, and then what do you do to counter it? Because I think even knowing this is a disinformation attack backed by bot farms and being promoted through Twitter, how do you know that is happening to you, and then how do you counter it? And you've got to be able to understand and counter within a small space of time. We haven't got the answer to that one yet, but I think that's going to be a big feature of what we see in attacks in the future against individuals.
Yeah, it's fascinating with the speed at which technology is moving, and with how fast some of these models can learn. Publishing what looks to be a regular photograph of somebody somewhere. I think you're exactly right. It's those things. Is that reality? Is got to be the first thing I think that we got to start asking ourselves, which is in a way sad, but it's also, it's just the facts. Same thing with, maybe a photograph is probably the 2010 version, but now they can create a video where it looks like you're speaking and saying things. And so I can only imagine, if becoming the target of a bad actor, how difficult that would be to try to say, that's not me. I didn't do that, even though it looks like exactly like it was. So I'm glad you brought that up, and I don't envy you guys having to brainstorm ways to potentially respond to that. But what I want to talk a little bit. Well, I want to talk a lot a bit about the book that you guys co-authored, and the title of it. I'm a big fan of End Game First. And I won't go down a big rabbit hole, but whether you're talking about strategizing for business or annual, quarterly, or whether you're talking about trying to be customer centric, right, and understand your customer, the ability to imagine the end and then build backwards is, I think, one of the most powerful skills anybody in business can do. So I love the title. Just had to get that out there. But End Game First, a leadership strategy for navigating crisis in business. Give us just a little bit about the book, how you guys decided to write it. It's obviously been successful. So just give us a little bit of put some humanity, I guess, behind how you guys got here.
Yeah. Brandon, we were number one on Amazon in a very obscure category for a week. So, we're our successes, our successes,
hey,
we want to be humble,
Success is relative. Yeah, I hear you.
But Mike, do you want to,
for those of us interested
to explain how we got to the title? Because I think that's quite illustrative.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of interesting. When the COVID hit, I was going from some of my background experiences, the earthquake, and then back in Pakistan, some of the counterterrorism, and obviously some of the events in command throughout my career. So we were talking about this particular event and how horrific that earthquake was in Pakistan. And we were talking to Roderick about, kind of, hey, this is what happened. And I gave him this example of when General Abizaid, my boss, the Central Command commander, came ashore about a month to check on things, how things were going, and it was just the assessment phase. And he says, "Hey, Mike, we have a bad habit of sending military places and not leaving. Well, what's your exit strategy?" Well, I started out with 7 people and grew to 1,500 over the time. But that was so prescient in that idea that, hey, this crisis is going to end. How do you shape it that we're going to end with no surprises and what we think about? What's that strategic end state? Which he said, hey, Mike, we need to provide humanitarian assistance and we need to improve U.S.-Pakistan relations. They're a key ally. So do you need any more guidance? And boy, I looked at him and it was first month. I was still flowing people in. I was like, okay, great advice. And then because of series of events, I understood that there was actually a taxonomy to a disaster, how it progressed in 4 kind of unique stages. But that idea that, hey, this is going to end. How do we want to be postured to do that ending? And Roderick aptly, came up with the title of Endgame First because of that strategic end state that we did. And so we used that incredibly effective with Roderick's background and the business acumen. And how do we apply it to business? And how did we emerge out of the COVID after losing 40% of our business right away due to domestic and international travel support, to be able then to grow when COVID ended, like 44% growth in the following year. And it was posturing that way, knowing how we were going to position.
I think,
Did I capture?
Yeah, you did. It's just such a profound thing. It's because I think, I think particularly at the start of a crisis, nobody thinks it's going to end. We all kind of have that emotional response to COVID, just like, God, how long is this going on? You just think it's forever, But of course, if you actually do have that kind of foresight to say, well, this is going to end, so it's going to end, so let's start planning for that. Today is today, and then Mike, as he said, he has this taxonomy of a crisis. But I think during the pandemic, we had to shut down a cybersecurity company. We weren't able to attract like a third round of funding, and so I had that top of mind at the time. And I was just thinking, gosh, I actually wish I'd have thought about the end at the beginning, because I would have planned a couple of things differently. I think my formula was probably correct to begin with, but like I'd have been thinking and planning for the end at the beginning, and I think it's particularly applicable to particular kind of startups. Obviously, venture-backed ones, It has to end because the investors need their money back. So you have to think about that. It can't go on past 10 years because everyone's options have gone, unless you kind of somehow restructure it. But so there is an end. So I think that just, and of course, people just emotionally aren't geared to thinking of the end when they're at the beginning. So I thought it was just a really profound insight, and it led us to a set of conversations about how to manage a crisis, and that became the spine of the book.
Yeah, I love it. And it it just sort of shines a light on what you were just talking about, that if in the middle of a crisis, everybody's trying to figure out how in the world am I going to adjust to this new normal? And what does this new normal mean? And, but only I guess only the few are thinking about, well, this normal too will end and there'll be another quote unquote new normal. And what does that look like? It also reminds me just of one of the brightest business minds I know that has been wildly successful in private equity and venture capital, was on the board of Tesla and just one of my all-time favorite people. But he told me whenever they invest in a business, whenever they think about, is this going to be a successful business? They do exactly this, right? They look at it backwards. They say, look, fast forward. Let's assume that we have been successful. And they sometimes go so far as to write up the actual, they don't do this anymore, but if you had a business broker, you'd have an ad for the business, right? So write up, what does this look like when we are ready to sell it before they even buy the business? And just the process of doing that elicits all of the either, well, gosh, it's actually pretty close, or do you realize all the things we have to do in order to get to that end game to be able to sell it? But and I remember thinking, gosh, that's brilliant. I sure wish I thought like that.
It's hard to do. I mean, I don't claim in any way to be like one of those. I mean, I think some people are brilliant at business. They really are visionary. They're doing like investing in stuff, 5 years ago, like in AI and stuff, and just really understand. I think it's impossible to see the future, but they certainly back their analysis of macro trends and understand that. And I don't tend to be that anyway. I think that's why I love this. This is what we put together, because it's a much more sort of like, okay, you're in a crisis, it's going to end. Like it's a shorter time span. I think like, people that make real extreme wealth, they're much better at like being able to do what you just said and think forward 5 to 10 years. I think I can't do that. I think that's really hard. But I think these shorter time span managing a crisis, I felt like a benefit for me.
Yeah, for sure. Look, I can't do it either. But at least I can repeat what somebody that was really smart told me.
That's what we do.
Yeah. Right. Well, look, you guys are the ones that wrote the book about it. So I guess you know a little bit about it, right? But I get it. To your point, you weren't talking about the ability to look a decade in the future. You're talking about, look, however long this crisis lasts. So walk us through, sort of the what's in the book, why it's been so helpful, why it's been such a success, and then I want to get into a little bit about sort of the process of you guys writing it. But
sure,
yeah. So if somebody's interested, what's sort of the elevator speech about this book?
I would say that one of the things that Mike does really well. So the first chapter is called Anatomy of a Crisis. It's just understanding that there's been millions of crises or thousands of crises in the world, and they all kind of look the same. and actually, you can even take that down to a super micro level and say, even if it's a personal crisis, like having a problem with something, it kind of there's these distinct phases. And I feel like once you understand that, it kind of takes a lot of pressure and stress out. You're like, oh, okay, I understand. I'm on phase 2 now. And I actually had this experience. And so, so we start with anatomy of a crisis, and then we explain like what you should do to go through these various phases, like build a team, set your communications, maybe some. I think one of my favorite chapters about refitting. This comes directly from Mike's experience in Pakistan. Okay, you've got some attack helicopters, but they're needed for first aid. So just you've got something, but you have to refit it. That kind of stuff. So we go through this, like explaining that. But I'll let Mike jump in. But I had a friend recently who'd read the book. Forced him to read it and give us a review on Amazon. But he said, actually, you know what? He said, and he had an event where both his parents at the same time got sick and had to go to completely independent care homes in the UK. And he was like, I'm on phase 3 of the crisis now. Honestly, Rod, he said that book was so helpful. He said, and he goes, I didn't realize I was going to need it. And so he related it to his personal crisis. And he said, and he texted me. He was like, I'm on phase 3. We're in steady state. We needed to get to steady state. And I was like, wow, that was actually the best compliment I had for the book, because it was just like, he'd read it, which is good, but also he applied it, and it helped calm him down, because he realized it was a process. He was going through it. He'd gone through the emergency bits, and he was just in this like holding position where he wasn't out of the crisis, but he was still, managing it. But it allowed him to kind of calm down. So that was the best review / compliment I had for the book, because it was somebody applying it. So
yeah, that's great, and I love the story
but
too.
Like, I mean, yeah, I think that's. I want to give you a chance to jump in.
Yeah, no, you nailed it. It's kind of that idea of recognizing that, and that's what became obvious, is that each of these crises do have predictability. Is that almost that 911 moment that, holy smokes, what just happened? And then, and the phases can actually blend together. You could be in different phases, and because of geography or events or whatever. As we were watching, COVID, like, it seemed like the East Coast got hit or the West Coast got hit first, and that was a wave that crossed the country. And so people were in that 911 phase of what do we do and how do we do it? Then it's okay, we need to plan, but what are those second and third order effects? Like for the earthquake, if we didn't get clean water, if we didn't have the right separation for sanitation, we were going to encourage dysentery and you're going to have a crisis inside a crisis if you hadn't planned properly or thought about those second and third order effects. And then this new normal is, okay, we wanted to get back to normalcy. How do you do that in a way, because that settles people down? It's a new normal. We use that term a lot, but it is the normalcy getting back. For us, it was building schools. It was getting some temporary shelters up for people to be able to get back to the way of life. And then the fourth stage was, hey, this is going to end. How do we prepare for that rebuild, reconstruction? And how do we move on from the disaster to a better future? And what does that look like? So in that, and then knowing that each of these phases also requires you to think about it differently and have a different decision-making process for those. In the first part, it's about saving lives, or it's about just taking care of that 9/11 emergency, and then it was more thoughtful and planful of how do we do that, and how do you support. For me, it was, hey, what are these things that we can do to be able to make sure there's no surprises? How do we support our exit? How do we turn it over properly to the USAID and other facilities that were going to come in to help rebuild, reconstruct, but do it in a way that there were no surprises to anyone or to our hosts, and be able to plan that effectively. And so there was a decision-making process to be able to do it. And then one of the neat chapters was like Roderick, because I was telling him about, I initially went in the country with about 7 people. And so we started talking about what were those qualities and how interesting knowing that staff and knowing those strengths, and how do you pair them up to be able to make sure that you didn't have any blind spots and were covered properly.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
Interesting. That is real. That's fascinating. So is there a point that you just have to assume that a crisis is going to happen? It could be tomorrow. It could be this year, next year. We need to have a crisis plan. We need to have a crisis. We need to be prepared so that when it comes, we can sort of go to this guidebook. Or is there any proactive approach to a crisis, or is it reactive after you realize what's going on?
I think you could do some crisis planning. I think you should do some crisis planning. I mean, we internally do crisis planning for our company. I mean, obviously time is limited, so you have to choose what you think the most 3 likely things potentially are that are going to happen, and then maybe train on those. I mean, for us, we did a lot of internal training on ransomware and assume this communication system doesn't work. What's our fallover system? A lot of the principles in the book are in things we do in terms of communicating and how do we do all these things. We managed a crisis last year, an internal crisis, followed quite a lot of the playbook of the book in terms of communication and check-in. And so I think there is, there's always unexpected things. So it's impossible for a company to predict the crisis, because obviously by definition, if you could predict the crisis, you wouldn't do it, right? So that's why a crisis is particularly different, because it does upend everything that you thought. So it is a new environment, which is what I think is interesting. The one thing I would say right now is, and Mike and I were talking about this morning, is I think AI is really a slow-moving crisis under every company or every business in the world right now, and has the potential to be incredibly disruptive. and I'm not sure if it's going to be an acute crisis or a slow burn crisis, but as we were talking about this morning, I'm starting to see some of the principles that we would apply to like a crisis apply to this, because it is a revolutionary technology that it certainly has a dramatic impact on a lot of white collar jobs like accounting, law, that kind of stuff, and how you position yourself through this massive sea change in the economy, I think is interesting. And so I'm not sure it fully fits into our kind of skeleton of the book, but there's certainly things around it. One of the things we were talking about this morning is, one of the things that we cover in the book and we realized during the pandemic is communication is so key to, obviously obvious point, but people rarely do it super well. And I think in the modern environment, what Mike does really well and did in the pandemic is like, it's not just email. You do email, phone, text, Slack, like, you communicate across so many different channels because people receive information in so many different ways, and that they have to be told numerous times, but also not told, they have to be informed numerous times, but it's just people consume information in so different ways. An email gets less attention than a text message and a phone call. And so you have to create, communication. It becomes so important in companies now because people use lots of different communication tools within that. And I can see this emerging in AI as people, because it's new, people are going to be fearful of it. Are my jobs at stake and all of that kind of piece, rather than sometimes seeing the opportunity. So communicating what we're doing and what we're thinking about becoming really important for us. So, I was just thinking that, AI definitely has some of the features of a slow-moving crisis for the economy, for companies.
Yeah, that's it. That's interesting, and it brings up a couple of things for me. First is I could not. I mean, what you just said about communication, I wish you could shout from the rooftops for, myself and everybody else to hear and be reminded of 12 hours or 12 times a day. But one of the things it's become very apparent to me in my business career is that I agree wholeheartedly. Communication is at the heart of most things, and it's often easy to communicate. It is very difficult to communicate clearly, and I think it goes to what you said. People they flip out an email and they think, "Oh yeah, I communicated that." Well, you utilized one form of communication to start that communication. And look, I got to be quiet. It sounds like I'm the one being interviewed here. I'm trying to highlight what you said because I couldn't agree more. I'm trying to, as we talk through this, I'm trying to think about the difference, where the line is between what could be considered a crisis, like with the potential AI crisis, and a threat, because I think maybe AI could also pose a security threat. And I guess maybe a security breach is considered a crisis, but a crisis may not be a security breach, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I think there's some interesting things you could do around offense with AI, particularly on these small open source LLMs that you can run off a laptop now, and you can move around with those. But I think that's possibly overstated. Like most things, probably overstated short term, understated long term, and with new technology. So I don't see. I know there are experts that are concerned, obviously, about the generative capabilities of AI and where it goes in an uncontrolled fashion. I understand that, but I think what I mean by crisis, I just think until you've really played with these systems and got involved with them and understand how they can work at a company, you realize how powerful they are. And in terms of and I think it is definitely a revolution in terms of, for example, people go to university to do, and to try and get jobs in finance or law. That used to be the pathway to or coding, right? Those are three recognized pathways to a middle class or upper middle class lifestyle, white collar lifestyle in the United States. Those are gone within 5 years or maybe 3, because today, you can get ChatGPT to build code for you and then have it reviewed by one person sitting possibly outside the game. So there's no way, given how modern technology companies, optimize for performance, that they're not going to just remove
Agreed.
all those jobs, and I just think so the effect on society of that, you're rewiring two things at once. You're rewiring a large part of your middle class economy, and you're definitely rewiring college. I mean, like, what? I go and do an accounting degree. Why? Because there's a system here. I can see you going to do like classics, right? Because like, okay, well, it's fun, it's like, at least it's entertaining. And the AI might not know Homer, but well, it does actually. But like, I mean, so I think there's an enormous shift happening, and I think it's interesting because we have one of the chapters in our book is called Undercurrents, about just when there's stuff happening. And I think, so COVID did something that we're all aware of, is restructured the economy, and that's remote work. So remote work has restructured the economy, restructured downtowns around the world. And, so Thursday's the new Friday, like all those kinds of things. I live in San Francisco, so obviously more exposed to it than most, but it's a true of every city. But what it also did, it's created the conditions for every company to plug AI in. So for like most remote companies, all our tools are virtual. We're not physically in so we've got all these communication systems and everything's in the cloud. And so I plug AI into it all and I get like massive insights and optimization, right? So pandemic was a precondition for the enterprise adoption of AI. And I think it's an undercurrent, and we talk about undercurrents and that crises, because they throw everything up in the air and then it lands in a different pattern when it comes back down onto the floor. It allows for new changes. And I think if you hadn't have had the pandemic, you wouldn't have had the potential such a rapid adoption of AI into companies.
That's interesting. Look, I think you're dead on with the displacement of entire industries by AI models and what that's going to do to the upper middle class, but also the higher education system around the world. Can you guys, or can we as the collective, can we even anticipate or imagine from the threat standpoint, like, not, I guess, assuming that AI is going to take large swaths of jobs, right? But from the whether it's taking over a system for ransomware or other creative ways to extract resources from a big entity. Can you guys share some examples for how AI might attack a large corporation that isn't, that maybe we haven't thought about before? That's a difficult question, but
all right, I'll go on. AI does basically, Mike was saying this the other day. I mean, it's essentially like, in terms of cybersecurity, it just so if you get like 100 ransomware attacks a day in your company, you're going to get 1,000, right? So it's going to 10x it because it just makes it easier and more sophisticated. But for the most part, touch wood, or if you've got good cybersecurity controls, that step up of attack, it should just be volume, not sophistication. I think the thing that I was thinking about is if companies in a rush to adopt AI systems for efficiency, so just as the weakest link in your current human cybersecurity system, your current company is the human, assistant. It's going to, if your AI assistant has certain permissions and they're not controlled, so that AI assistant, it reads my email, it's allowed to respond on my behalf outside of the company and the controls aren't set, I think that could be a vector that, just like, it's almost like mapping the human vulnerability onto AI vulnerability, I think is something that companies won't think about, and then it'll be a problem. They'll be like, oh, we've all got AI assistants now working and scheduling and booking our plane tickets and all the rest of it. And that's actually the way you get in to kind of manipulate systems internally. Exactly the same as you do today. It's just you'll be manipulating an AI assistant who hasn't got the same security controls as a human assistant does today, right? So I think that's probably something.
Hey, Mike.
I would map the human vulnerability.
Hey, Mike, was I just hearing things, or was Roderick trying to say a little while ago that he couldn't look into the future and anticipate things that were going to happen. Right? He said, "No, I'm not that smart. I can't do it." Lo and behold, he pulls this thing out 10 minutes later about exactly what's going to happen. Look, I think
That's why
it's
such a great team. I mean, that
I love
idea, the entrepreneur and visionary to be able to pull those out that helps us steer the company is always quite good.
Either that or the insane ramblings of us drunk.
Well, no, but what you said, there's a lot of brilliance there. As if you could, we only have one model right now, and it's the human model, right? So perhaps the only way we could ever anticipate is to try to map what we have experienced with humans and see if that's ever going to happen with the AIs.
Yeah.
Mike,
we've done a lot, a lot in the past of man-machine interface, but what AI has done is just, oh my goodness, it just exponentially advanced it. And I did some work thesis work when I was going through my master's on, hey, okay, let the machine do what's important and then let the human, make sure that we, sense that. But boy, what AI just did is it creates this almost ideation partner, but it needs to be ensure that it's, as Roderick pointed out, I think that's really one of the things is how much controls are you going to dial in, to, and like most systems, we talked about it when we were over in Warzone, is when new units would come in the theater, you'd restrict kind of their freedom of movement or freedom of controls for a while until you understood it. And then as they understood the culture and got blended in, then you could understand that, okay, I can loosen up some of those controls. And I think Roderick's spot on. It said, boy, if you don't understand that going in, kind of what the controls are on that, you could find yourself in going like, oh my goodness, this is not what I expected, rather, and you get what you inspect rather than what you expect, is the famous adage.
Yeah.
So I think that's crucial to understand the underlines of it, but also what's I think is the real crunch is the exponential leap in technology, what that does for you in collated information and provided for you in a succinct manner to be able to take a look at it and go after it. Nowhere have we had that incredible resource before to assist you. And so that's where it really becomes.
Yeah, powerful. Would you guys... Absolutely. Would you guys characterize AI as the number one threat to corporations worldwide at the moment?
No, I don't think so. I think it's still cyber, and obviously bad actors are early adopters. They're using AI to kind of induce their systems. But there's a reason why the Nigerian prince scam is still being used. It's because they're looking for what if I'm an organized crime cyber group, I want the person that still believes in the Nigerian prince that needs money wired to them, because they're obviously my target demographic, right? So I'm going to send multiple emails around the world to find that. I don't want someone that doesn't believe that, so I'm still looking for the least sophisticated actors in a corporation to target. So I think it's still cybersecurity. For me, I don't think AI per se, I think, is a threat. I think it's crime. AI enabled crime is still the biggest threat.
Okay. Well, so maybe for those of us that don't live in it, can you guys give us sort of a ranking, maybe a top three? Would love a top five. What are the most significant threats that a mid to large size corporation? Well, that's impossible. How about this? What are the top three threats of a publicly traded multinational corporation?
Yeah, I mean, I'd go. I'm sort of slightly blended, but I'd stick to my individual actor. Sort of either disgruntled employee. So I'll broaden that out. Disgruntled employee who either acts externally to attack the company or acts as an insider. and attacks the company, or is a not an employee but someone who's got a grudge against the company but just is able to just create havoc by just threatening executives and being good at that. I would still say that probably that is not my number one. My number two is similar. It's activist groups. So every corporation has a kind of an opponent in some ways. And I was fortunate enough to talk to the city attorney of a large American city, and he was just saying that AI is just killing his law office because activists who have a political position are just able to file endless legal requests and freedom of information requests against his office, just grinding it to a halt. And I think corporations are going to start to experience that, just like that kind of just AI-enabled activist activity, because corporations take policy positions, or they're under threat from a variety of different areas, given the political climate in not just the United States but around the world. And I would also say probably geopolitical risk is an interesting one. Like the world is changing. Geopolitics has shifted. People didn't pay attention to geopolitics until 2015, 2016. It was like, oh gosh, you actually meant that you were going to slap tariffs on China, and our factory just got nationalized. Oops. And we can't work there anymore. And so I think that continues to be a risk, but I still think they're so hard to deal with. Individuals who have a grudge against your company, they have so many tools that they can use if they're not concerned about their own reputation or the effect on them. So if they're very, very committed to attacking you for whatever reason, or if they're mentally ill, I think there's just so many tools legally, harassment-wise, through social media, through campaigns. I think that remains a challenge, and I think it remains a big challenge for companies to deal with that, because it sort of falls between like the police getting involved, and it's often a kind of an area where the police can't get involved straight away, and I think it's quite difficult. So anyway, I'd go. That would be my sort of top three.
Yeah, I would probably go with the similar. I'd probably change one out, and I think the insider threat is an interesting one, or someone that understands it has a vendetta or wants to do it. I think is pretty big. Roderick mentioned cyber before, and I think related is that misinformation, disinformation. The idea of being able to first one with a story that's just outrageous, but it has the companies on their heels trying to defend or represent or try to tell the truth when there's so much out there. These targeted attacks on each side to get the sentiment against a particular organization can be very powerful, I think. And I think that, and again, AI and some other sources to be able to have that sophistication as well as the volume of what it can generate to constantly push stuff into the news or to represent something in a different light than what actually happened. And that's always a tough one. We dealt with it all along, who was the first with the news and the right news. But once that's dotted out there, even if it's bad information, and what you learn, or what I've learned through times, is a lot of time the first report is always wrong. But in today's environment, how people accept information without having that critical thinking to really understand and go research and understand that this is potentially a fake or improper, or to check its sources or methods, makes it very vulnerable and builds a wave of sentiment before you even have a chance to get out there and really understand how do you defend against it and then bounce it back.
Yeah. That's
interesting. You know what? That's interesting, Mike, because both of us, strong counterterrorism background, but neither of us said counterterrorism. Terrorism.
Yeah. So what
and they've spent millions on that.
Yeah, I realized it was great. What you mentioned. I think that was key, because there's so much going on, and wow.
Yeah. Well, I realized when I asked that question, I asked it very poorly, because I think I mixed two things. Right. I think I mixed I asked what the threats were, but that mixes what the motivation is with what the tool being used is.
Yeah.
And you guys artfully asked, you guys were very artful in your answers. What I heard you say was that from a motivation standpoint, why is this company being attacked? You've got the individual sort of insider, and that's kind of infinite, right? You're never going to ever say, we've got that covered.
Right.
Then you've got the organizational / social / political that for whatever climate reasons or whatever they're going to go after.
Correct.
And then
whatever.
I think what I heard is sort of mixed through all those is also is the what drives a lot of people is financial money, right? So it's either a kind of a sick individual, an organization, or nation, or nation state, or some type of organization that has a agenda, or people are looking to get an easy dollar.
Yeah.
And then they choose their tool of choice, I suppose, right? Whether they're
correct.
And gosh, look, obviously, I mean, you guys think about this probably a lot. I don't think about it quite as much. But as I sort of peel back the layers, this is a unbelievably complex topic and situation that you guys have made a career out of.
Yeah. The threat surface is enlarged, so because there's so many tools out there to attack you from. But I think one of the other things, if you wanted to ask that more strategic question, Roderick and I were just talking about that. We're hearing a lot of anxiety about what's happening in the world. From the geopolitical stage, the events in the Middle East, the events in Ukraine and Russia, the events over in China, Taiwan, the domestic political vote across the world. Where almost half the world is voting throughout this year, and then almost a kind of uncomfortable unrest inside the United States. Those things seem to be resonating and causing people, much anxiety. Roderick gets those calls quite a bit.
Yeah,
it's.
I know it's an interesting one though, that way, because I mean, it's like I think that sort of illuminates our job in some ways, because it's
absolutely,
like, we're actually trying to be like, well, what does this mean? It's like, okay, so there's this background anxiety, but like, okay. It's like, I mean, it's sort of that, nobody can, we can say, well, in the absence of, a threat or, capability or motivation to damage your company or yourself, we think you're okay, and I think it doesn't mean to say you shouldn't plan for some sort of negative outcomes, but, I think a part of our job is to translate that background anxiety, and then, if it doesn't really track to a recognized threat or how we would assess threat, then, you want to give people the comfort or peace of mind to carry on doing what you're doing. It's like, and I would say that as a broader point, how we see ourselves in security is as an enabling function. You should be able to do anything. And, in a free society, sometimes, the security bill might be a bit higher because there are people that oppose that. But we're there to enable you to live a normal life or conduct your normal business. That's what we do, Yeah,
that's fascinating. Well, so both of you guys have public service backgrounds, right? Scotland Yard, the U.S. military. I'm curious, I'd love to start with you, Mike. I'm curious, Vice Admiral, you were one of the top leaders in the United States Navy, and you saw a lot. I mean, I can't imagine the millions of dollars that went into training you from a leadership perspective. As you transitioned out of that into the civilian world, right, or into the business world, has there been anything that has surprised you or been eye-opening or interesting that either is present in the military that isn't in business world, or vice versa, that just really stood out?
Wow, great question. I would I think for any job you miss the people, you miss the mission, and I think that's the beauty of the similarity. I think is finding a company that has a mission that you really enjoy and support, that you enjoy getting up each morning and you're passionate about. But even more so is that culture of the environment. The culture that Roderick and I have been able to build within the company makes us very proud of the people, that they feel like they're a part of a mission, that it is more of almost like a team environment. And so that leaders, regardless of what industry or walk of life, to be able to have that sense of mission and purpose, and to enjoy the people that you're going to be working with, and to have that culture that reinforces your beliefs and what you value. And so, and it's been a road, but Chris Group was great. It was like all the, same guys to work with in JSOC, all working there
yeah.
and working with companies. And then at a company was a little bit more toxic. And then to be able to find, Concentric and what Roderick has built here, to be able to help evolve that and develop that and nurture that has been really, really wonderful. And so, I see a lot of similarities rather than a stark difference of, wow, this is what I left. And I know many that have left that area find difficulty in doing that. And I think it's just, how do you translate those wonderful things that you enjoyed in whatever line of work, to be able to take those with you and to adapt those to the place that you're in?
That's a phenomenal answer.
No, good. Thank you.
And very inspiring. Very inspiring too.
Yeah.
Roderick, did you have any additional thoughts or anything to build on?
I think it's not easy to build a good culture, and I think you have to show a lot of leadership, and I think it's what you say yes to and what you say no to is really important. And Mike and I were talking over Christmas about a particular case, and it's just like, this particular line of work we're doing stopped aligning with our values. I can't ask any of our people to pick up the phone if I'm not willing to pick up the phone to these guys. Let's move on, And I think that's the beauty of, the company's privately held, so we can choose that. But I think you build on that. You build a culture where you can attract some fantastic people to work with you, because they trust the leadership, that we are only going to use their skills or their capabilities for things that are worthwhile. Sometimes some work's not as interesting as others. We all understand that, but we set up a foundation on the side of the company as well to kind of do non-profit rescues when we have the opportunity. So we didn't want that company just to be a company, if that makes sense. We wanted to have a mission and a sense of mission. And I just think it's not easy to do. You have to work at it all the time, and culture you have to work at all the time. But it's actually, when you are faced with a crisis, boy, do you understand if you've got a good culture or not at that moment. If you've got a good one, you're going to have a better crisis than if you don't.
Interesting. Look, I couldn't agree more. But look,
I think that's that's huge.
Let's talk. Would love for you to talk more about that. Why is that the case?
Well, so what Mike is, I think Mike and I have very different personalities, but hopefully, and I think it's true that our the people that work for us, they sort of trust us, and so we trust them. And so in a crisis, you are so constrained if you can't speak freely to your company or your people. If you can't have an open dialogue, this is what's happened, this is what we think we're going to do, these are the things we don't know or we're unsure about or worried about, but this is the way forward, this is where we're going. I think you have to have a lot of trust to be able to do that. And I think that comes from culture and building that over time. And we have that at our company, and we notice it in other companies when they're in crisis and they're not able to do that. They have to have very siloed communications. We can't tell that person, we can't tell that person. I think part of crisis planning is actually, if you've built a good culture and a good culture of trust, it will enable you to row through those tough things, because most crises don't have good answers. Frankly, you're just managing a series of least worst options. And if you're transparent with people about that and you feel you're able to do that, you get everyone to buy in. So, but I think that's, Mike, how we talk about how we divide our roles. It's like Mike's like coaches the team and, keeps the team on the field. And then I'm kind of like, okay, let's figure out what sponsorship deal we need next. So that's our sports metaphor. But it's like that. it's a really good formula. I think I've recommended it to most people.
Well, I've noticed that since we started, you guys clearly have a good relationship, and a trusting relationship is because you both complimented each other several times. So it's energizing to see, I guess is what I'm trying to say. What you guys clearly have a unique relationship, and that's hard to find. So it's I guess energizing is the only word I can pull out of this dumb head to describe it. But
it is fun, and it is, it's part of the culture, like Roderick said, to empower people, but also we almost look for folks that are used to a little bit of dealing with ambiguity and chaos, and how do they deal with that? Because, as you know, crisis disrupts everything that you thought was normal, but how they respond in those events, and that is so important, and it's that value and empowerment that I think it's so wonderful.
Yeah, it is. I spend a lot of time thinking about strategizing around issues just like that, right? Culture, people, humans. How do we better align, better communicate, get everybody, align the incentives, et cetera. So it's always fascinating to me hearing what highly successful people like you guys have to say on the issue. And we're always trying to get a little bit better, trying to learn a little bit more. Just next topic, really quickly. I'm curious about you guys with regard to China and what you see with your clients. And, Mike, you mentioned earlier that there's a sort of a general unrest with, maybe worldwide, but it's certainly within this country, about the different geopolitical situations going on around the world. If you ask somebody on the street, they'll tell you, China has infiltrated the U.S. Congress and has bought senators and is in every one of our corporations, et cetera. What you guys have a unique look inside because you were in security and you understand the vulnerabilities. What are your thoughts on China and sort of where things are right now?
Yeah, I would probably, from a China perspective, my sense was more of that potential threat of the Taiwan, the South China Sea, their actions and activities to try to unseat the United States as the kind of the sole power, the monetary benchmark for the world, and they're looking at and they play the long game to be able to do that. So when I look at China, I look at the potential of what they're demonstrating in those different areas about how what that would do to the market or to the economy, or to potentially drag you into almost a global war that seems to be spreading, that, what would happen if they did invade Taiwan, at what point, or could they, or that dynamic. And then I think, from a technology side, they do have, different systems that we read about that has access and steal a lot of the IP from the United States. And so I think there's a more geostrategic about, potential hostile conflict and disruption to maritime, to industry, to supply chains, to all sorts of things, as well as create an environment that would cause quite a partition in the world if they would take Taiwan. And then you have the technology aspect where they are at a very fast rate, centered to take over the market and try to be the leader, within the economy. That's how I see China from that aspect.
Yeah, that's
Robert?
Interesting.
Yeah, I think, I'd sort of divide it up a little bit. I think, society's made up of different, elements: military, political, civil, business. And I think what people forget is that the Chinese lost the business community in America first. And that, was the tech companies trying to go into China and open and have Google there and Uber there. And they were absolutely destroyed by the Chinese government. obviously espionage, but just like actually regulatory control and all this kind of stuff. And they pushed American tech companies and they pushed the American business community, I would say, pretty roundly out of China. So if you're China, you'd lose the American business community first, way before you lost the political community. Then, I think now it's the one topic that both sides of the house agree on is that like anti-China essentially. And I think that I always say it's the United States of overcorrection, from being like completely open to China. And, the Americans and the Brits took the bet that if you let the Chinese into the World Trade Organization, they're going to boost everyone's economy and they're going to play by the rules, and they didn't, so that bet failed. So now we have to recalibrate our relationship with China. I think from a security perspective, we used to take a lot of companies over there to executive security and stuff and think about China. Nobody's touched it in 4 or 5 years. We're interested in the nearshoring, so American companies bringing their manufacturing into Mexico. That's its own security challenge, but we're interested in that. We think there's big opportunity there. So from a personal perspective, I think I think they've started to do this. I think the Biden administration started to tone down the rhetoric against China, because I think that needs to happen, because, fundamentally a war between China and America is not a good idea in any universe. So, and I think I was over in the UK with some senior officials in November, and the UK sees itself a bit more of a bridge. It's a bit more open to China, but it doesn't have some of the exposure to Chinese economic or aggressive business. It has exposure to the espionage and the trying to steal information and all that. But I think the thing that's going to come and be a really challenging issue is the electric vehicles. China's got the best batteries, best lithium. It can produce electric vehicles for a fraction of the cost that the United States or Europe can now. The United States are putting tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, and but even so, they'll still be cheaper than the cheapest Tesla. So, but the US administration is able to do that. The European Union can't do that. They're going to absolutely kill themselves on that, because it's a real wedge issue in the EU right now, and they're going to risk the engine of the European economy is Germany, and blowing up their motor manufacturing industry doesn't feel like a good idea. So we're about to find out what really happens. So, one future scenario is that the Chinese control the entire global electric vehicle fleet with all the connected internet capabilities that entails. I don't think that's where we want to go, but they've got such an enormous advantage, as Mike said, in that particular sector of business. That we could be in trouble. I don't fear it from AI. I don't fear it from advanced weapons technology. I think all those things are, the US probably has I don't fear it from an alliance perspective. I mean, NATO is so much stronger than this kind of axis of, Iran, China, and Russia. That's not even a formal alliance. It's not. It's not NATO. So, but I do think there's these things that people. They're coming through business where they Chinese go, and people don't quite understand that. Yeah, whole motor industry could be in China's hands within 10 years if we have to stick to our climate agreement, our climate pledges. Then we're only having electric cars. Then absolutely, you get my point. It's an interesting one. I think if you want to think about Chinese economic impact, I think looking at the electric vehicle market is probably the greatest lens to look at it.
Sure. I think that's really insightful and wise. I think the solar falls into that as well in terms of their ability to create the panels, et cetera.
Cheapest panels.
I mean, I gotta give them credit. We've been talking throughout about sort of foresight and the ability to think about the future, and whether it's a sort of an organic. This green energy thing is more organic, or whether it's more sinister than that, pushed by somebody else. They've made some moves with regard to the rare earth minerals and just everything that positions them to do exactly what you just said, that we just sort of back into a situation where, it went from trying to get oil from the Middle East. Now all of a sudden we're energy dependent, but on a different country. But it's you guys have a lens or a view or a portal into how this impacts the business community that no one else really gets to look through. And so it's fascinating. I would have suspected that there was more nefarious action that going on with inside of businesses. Final questions. Roderick, you made a comment earlier that I thought was particularly insightful about trying to look at humans and what the risks are with humans, and then sort of overlaying that onto AI, so that to try to anticipate what we might expect. And when you were talking about the top risks that companies face security wise, you mentioned the internal threat. You said particularly if you mentioned mental illness. And so I just took a quick note, and I couldn't help but think about, look, if mental illness is a contributing factor to potential security threats with humans, I don't even know if this is possible, but certainly I don't want to say AI could get mental illness, but to the extent that there are leaks, bugs, nefarious aspects to it, once it passes whatever, not simulation, but once they become smarter than us. Yeah, exactly. What? I just wanted to throw it out there to see if you guys don't have any thoughts, then we can move on. But
general AI, I believe it's called. So like, again, without being Darwinian in any way, like, so, if you have a mental illness, there's usually a reason for that, right? So it's like, nobody's, well, yeah. I mean, there's like something not wired correctly, or there's like a result of trauma or something. Something. It's not. There's a reason, and I think that'll be the same with AI. So right now some of the systems hallucinate. Nobody's quite sure what that means, why that is. But I think how I would say, so there's not just going to be one. I don't believe in a future where there's just one AI. There's lots of little specific AIs doing different things, and I think they're going to rely on training data. In fact, training data is corrupted. And in some way, I think that is where you get an artificial intelligence that's corrupted is what you're referring to. And I think that's a potential danger. And I think on the offensive side, if I'm an offensive agency right now, I'm going to be thinking about how do I corrupt my enemy's artificial intelligence data so that their missiles miss the target.
And that's what you were alluding to earlier, right? Was that you can essentially mislead it if you have enough of this sort of propaganda information that it draws improper conclusions. I mean, gosh, right. That's a lot of effort. Like putting a bug or a virus in an AI system. Surely there's an easier way if you're a bad actor. But
I mean, it depends what the stakes are, isn't it? I mean, it's like it was a lot of effort to build Stuxnet, but turns out nuclear reactors was a good idea. I mean,
that's true.
It's
I think it's just my general insecurity about the fact that I heard the other day that a child in sub-Saharan Africa that can get access to a Starlink terminal and has a cell phone has access to more information than the president of the United States did in 1980.
Yeah, I mean, but but we're into that fascinating philosophical debate of like information without knowledge, training, or insight. Is that of any use to you? I don't know.
I agree. I agree.
But is it? I
agree 100%.
But what's missed with AI is if you plug it into AI, that kid also has insight. Then it's like, and that's the revolutionary step. Yeah.
Well, I don't know what's scarier: the fact that there's the access to the information is so simple, or the fact that we had such little information in 1980, right? Like, hey, things turned out okay. Okay, well, look,
there's a taxonomy, that Roderick talked about. There's data, there's information, understanding, and knowledge. So you have access to all this data, but how do you translate that to actually, get to those next levels so that there's information, then there's understanding that, then really the knowledge you gain by having that. And so I think those are and as Roderick said, I think that's where AI comes in. It's like, it's able to digest so much data to get to those next layers to have somebody then collate it.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, the optimist is that child in sub-Saharan Africa can now set up a business without reference to ever going anywhere near a business school, or can just have an idea for a business and can just connect all those systems and understand how to do it with a $20 subscription to
Starlink,
ChatGPT, and a $50 subscription to Starlink. But I actually think I know we're at time, but the sort of low Earth orbiting satellite systems, they're an interesting potential security risk that no one's really thought about the integrity of those systems.
Well, they'll tell us about that. That sounds really fascinating.
Well, so whose word are we taking that those systems are secure?
Well,
so
pardon.
I'm running my company's backup across Starlink. So how do I know that Starlink satellite that I'm bouncing off is secure?
Yeah, no.
There's no quality assurance on that. And and what they'll tell you is that the technical system side of it is fine. There's two systems. There's the internet bit and then the propulsion bit. And it's but they're not connected. So there can be no way that it can be hacked across. But we all know that air gaps are.
Yeah. Oh, I got you. So as opposed to storing all your data in where it's a physical local server, and the actual, it's only being communicated via Ethernet. You're saying because you're using the Starlink communication.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. If I'm a bad guy, why don't I? I can corrupt one of those, and I've got a tap on the wire. Yeah. I've just got a tap on the. I've got the tap.
You have a data wiretap.
I'm sure there's someone in an intelligence service. Someone might.
Yeah. Is your phone ringing? Is your phone ringing yet?
No. Like I say, I'm not super.
Yeah, but you guys are the good guys. That everybody that sees this is going to understand that.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Part of being a good guy is trying as hard as you possibly can to think like a bad guy, which I imagine for y'all is pretty difficult. But look, my company, we're like a tiny business. We don't qualify for international travel to Iran or Pakistan, but I really wish we did because I would hire you guys.
Thanks.
Yeah, I would enjoy it. All right, final question. This is a little bit silly. It's a hypothetical. God forbid anything like this ever happened, but it can be really insightful. So we'll start with you, Mike. Like I said, God forbid, but look, there's a fire at your house. All people and pets are perfectly fine, but you have 10 to 15 seconds to run back in to your office where you are now and grab one thing before it's too hot to get back in. What is it that you grab?
That is funny because it's just things, and there's so much redundancy and save. Nowadays, there are some wonderful tokens and memorances and all that, but it's all things that you can, you carry with you in your heart or wherever that you kind of go, yeah, it's heartbreaking and it's disruptive, but yet if you have your health and well-being, you're in a good spot. I don't know whether there's, I'd go back and say, wow, that one thing I really want to, because it's.
No, that's a great answer. Look, that's a fantastic answer. I sat there in silence. I asked myself this question and sat in silence for 10 minutes, and I'm like, I don't know, my computer, whatever. But so that's a noble. Yeah, that's a great answer.
It's back up. So I just got a new computer and log back in. It's kind of
right.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
So some people are like, look, this is the cross that my grandfather handed down. It's been in my family for 3 generations. And it could be interesting, but boring dumb people like me, I can't. How about you, Roderick?
Oh, it's simple. Passport.
Oh, clever. This is a clever man right here.
Yeah.
Got to move. Yeah. As soon as you said it, I'm like, that's a pain in the ass to get that sorted out.
If you could get it, if you could get it,
a go bag.
A go bag.
I'm completely grounded without that thing. So
I love that. I love that.
Yeah,
I love it. All right, gentlemen, you guys are saints, and you're also very, very wise. And I appreciate you sharing some of that wisdom with me and the audience. I think they're going to eat this up. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you wanted to make sure that you wanted to try to get out there? How do people get your book?
Amazon. So just Google Endgame first. Put it in the Amazon search, Endgame first. And then we should say all the proceeds for the book go to our foundation as well, which we have used to help and rescue Afghans and Ukrainians.
Oh, wow. I love that. Love that.
So, so that's so all the proceeds for the book
go to the 188 Foundation, our 501c3. So we're very proud of that.
That's fantastic. What's it called? 188 Foundation. Okay. And if people are interested in looking at potentially hiring you guys, where do they go to find some more information?
Concentric.io.
Concentric with a C.io. CONCENTRIC.io. Thank you, guys. Don't forget, everybody, you can find Boundary Breakers in a lot of places. You can watch our episodes on the Boundary Breakers YouTube channel, or you can listen to each podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or any of the other major podcasting platforms. Thanks for listening.